everybody. Welcome to the May 2022 Eastside Clinic. I'm Alex Brickoff, and I'll be your host tonight. Tonight's clinic will be presented by David Yadock, and he's going to be talking about the use of mirrors on his train layout.
The title of this clinic is Use of Mirrors on a Layout. I'm going to go through several things that I've used, some techniques that I've used, some techniques that other people have used, and sort of show the pitfalls and pratfalls of using mirrors. You really want to use some care in using mirrors on a layout. The main thing is that they're a great way to expand a scene or to make your layout actually appear larger. And again, if they're utilized properly, they can provide an extreme amount of depth, especially where there is none. And like I said, over here, it increased the perceived space of a layout, which is kind of important, on even smaller layouts or larger layouts like mine. So here's a photo of my layout, and there's a really pretty good sized mirror in the corner of the room. It's about 2 feet by 6 feet. And what it does is it literally just punches a big hole in that area. And let's see if I can move my little cursor to sort of give you an idea where the mirror is. It's right here. You can see that. So it's directly above that large bridge. What it does is it actually reflects the mountain scene that goes across the other side of the room. So it's a very effective method. The only thing is that you, again, have to be careful of how you place a mirror. And we're going to go into that. Here's another scene with another one of my large mirrors. This one also, again, punches a pretty good size hole, about a 2 or 3 foot, about a 2 by 3 foot space into the layout, and creates the impression or continuation, let's say, of a valley going where there really isn't. It's just a mirror. That's one of the things that you have to really look at is placement of mirrors. There's lots of do's and don'ts. Like with everything, there's right ways and wrong ways to do it. As you can see in this sort of jury-rigged mirror image, freight cars would be pretty difficult to switch with that kind of mirror. Some fine details about what to do, where to put things, or how to put things. The key issue here is if you're going to have a structure, and if it's a certain type of structure, like a square, rectangular structure, you want to make sure that it's parallel to the mirror surface. Because if you go and you put it at an odd angle, which I'll show another picture of, you'll see that it'll look really weird. The key here is that you want to create a true mirror image of that building. And as you can see on this one, it just reflects very nicely where you don't even think that that's the same building. It's a different building. It's just that two of them are very similar. So this I set up just a dummy mirror on my layout to go and show you, if you go and you place the mirror sort of at an angle. And the other thing that I wanted to show you is about writing. Especially signs on a building, unless it is, like an image that just is a design or something like that can be reflected and not really change drastically. A palindrome. You're going to have backwards lettering, which is a dead giveaway to a mirror. And that you can see right here where the Van der Zanden gear and driveline supply becomes gobbledygook on the side of the building. So that's something that you have to be aware of. You really, if there's a reflected image of a building, you don't want to have any kind of signage at all. Placement angle. Again, this is inferred in the original start of this, is that if you go and you have something placed at a weird angle or whatever, it's going to give that structure a weird angle. John Allen, who was sort of the dean of model railroading, on one of his mirrors actually fell victim to it. Now, I don't know if he was going to have scenery blocking that mirror or that image. And so there'd just be like hints of buildings in between or whatever of, either structures or something. You can see where this image is canted at a weird angle where it should be straight. Now, my mirror right here, it literally is between two structures, and so it just reflects the opposite side of this building right here. So it provides a really good reflection of a part of the building that you don't even see, but with the mirror, it allows you to see that. Ah, yes, viewer reflection. This is a problem with mirrors that are set too close to the layout edge. Everyone can fall victim to this if, let's say you have a shelf layout and you want to extend that shelf layout, so you butt a mirror against the wall and the shelf layout goes into the wall. You might end up with somebody seeing their image in the mirror. So you have to be careful of that. There's ways of hiding it with either structures or some type of trees or something like that, that you can curtail a lot of viewer image being reflected in the mirror. And this is another key problem, an offensive item being reflected. And this one, I put the mirror behind a building, but it's in front of some actual railroad tracks on my layout. And so you have these two locomotives in a race. That would never happen. It just doesn't happen that way. So the problem is that, you go and you have an offending image. Yeah, it increases the space, but if you want to see a locomotive or a complete train, running side by side, so to speak, that really doesn't help the overall appearance or reality of a layout. One thing also has to do with, as I mentioned here, symmetry, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on in this discussion. Another problem with mirrors, and people don't have the concept of it, is that light reflected from a mirror will actually be darker because it is a reflection of the light passing against the surface and then re-entering, so to speak. So you have to be careful with that. This is the one mirror that I have sort of tucked away in back there, that one valley. And what I did was I placed some overhead lighting very close to the mirror, differs that darkness, so to speak, from the mirror image. You can sort of see a little bit of shade difference if you go and you look along here, that there is some shading difference, but it is very slight. I actually had to use a telephoto lens to actually capture this image because this mirror is about 8 to 10 feet away from the layout edge. Again, here's that view of that very large mirror, and this is a little bit closer up. And so it is right going about here on the layout. And so this point over here is actually on the opposite side of that portion of the alcove, which is about 8 or so feet away. So it almost makes it look like you're just looking into a completely different room. So a mirror plane, again, as mentioned in one of the first slides, is that you have to have it not only if you're reflecting a building at 90 degrees, or parallel, you also have to have it level and plumb. That is rather important because if you don't, it'll look like the building is falling over on its side, or the reflected image is falling over on its side. And it even throws off the building that is in the foreground, that's the actual building. It looks like it's slanting towards you. It detracts from the actual building itself and makes it look like this thing is falling over on its side. Mirror thickness. If you're going to have a mirror that's going to be very close to the front of the layout, located close to the actual viewer, you really don't want to use a back surface mirror. You want to use a front surface. Front surface mirrors are really good for that aspect because they really can't detect the little gap from the glass thickness. Helps a lot hiding that portion of the fake image, I guess you could say. The only problem with front surface mirrors is that they are very difficult to keep clean and to clean. A lot of care has to be taken in cleaning them. They used to be very, very expensive. The prices have come down significantly. So they are much easier or cheaper to use in these situations. And you can get pretty good sized front surface mirrors now for a reasonable cost. Next up, reflected distortion. This is one of those things where if you're using a very large mirror, you have to make sure that they have a very stable support structure. This mirror, again, is that mirror that was tucked in the corner. And like I said, it's about 2 by 6 feet. It's heavy plate glass. I think it's 1/4 inch thick plate glass mirror. It is heavy. And so there is a frame that I built up on the back side of the mirror. And I used mirror clips to hold it in place, metal mirror clips. And then on the wall structure, I built another 1 by 4 pine frame to attach the actual mirror frame. The mirror frame that's attached to the back side of the mirror is adjustable. I have on each of the corners set screws, 1/4 inch set screws that I can adjust out or in any way about a 1 inch travel. That helped align the mirror, and that is really important when you use large mirrors, is that you have a way of aligning mirrors, because otherwise you'll fall into the trap of some of the other things that I presented earlier, where you won't have it plumb or it will be off angle to what you really want to have reflected. Mirrors get dirty. I don't care what anybody says, and they tend to attract all kinds of dust and dirt, no matter how hard you try to avoid it. So you have to have them, or the ability to get at them to clean them. This mirror, that mountain that I'm sort of standing in front of, is completely empty on the back side of it. So I have access to that mirror to clean it. The other large mirror that I have, that one, the sort of river on top of it is 3/4 inch plywood. So I can actually stand on that or crouch on it to clean that. And the riverbed is also 3/4 inch plywood. So I can stand on that to get to the mirror to clean it. So yes, I can actually walk on water in that area. The hiding mirrors. Yes, the edges and tops are really disgusting things that are difficult to hide in some instances. So again, here's that corner mirror. It's pretty tough to go and see where the edge is of the mirror in this photo. And this is, just a straight photo taken, with the regular camera, no Photoshop or anything. One of the things I found is that you can, if you have a mountainside, you can fold it into the mirror slightly, and so that will hide that edge. The other thing that you can do is you can use the same color paint that your mountainside is, or land area, or whatever you have in front of the mirror, to go and hide the gap that's going to be created because of the mirror thickness. It depends on what the mirror, where it is, and what I'm trying to hide or how I'm trying to hide it. But a lot of times I will use that paint to do that, and especially the rolled sort of mountainside. That really helps. Hiding the backside of the mirror. So this is the mirror that is in that deep valley. This is an early picture of my layout. That's the structure that I built, and then all this outrigger stuff is for the mountain that's going to be placed behind it. This structure also has the ability to move. this whole structure has the ability to move. It looks like it's set up here, but all this was temporary framing, so to speak, until I got this completely placed properly for the correct angle to be reflected. Then once that was done, everything was put into position. So there's the backside of the mirror now. It's a good way to hide something. If you're going and having a large cityscape, you can go and use a tall building, very large structure to also hide a mirror. But this one worked really well because it literally blocked out that whole valley. So there's just a little sort of hint of the valley between this edge and this edge over here. So yeah, let's go into mirror tops. Like I said, they can be tough to hide. There's a multitude of ways of doing it, using an overhead roadway or viaduct, banners, even hanging clotheslines between buildings if you're going to have a mirror between a building to extend a street. Skyways, those are a pretty good way, or an umbilical between two structures. And overhead pipes, conveyor belts can also be used to hide that top edge. And then finally, clouds. For my two big mirrors, you can't really go and have a conveyor belt or something like that. So I chose clouds for those, and it worked really well. The mirror does not go all the way to the top of the ceiling. If you noted on both of those mirrors that I had, the early photos, they were down about 4 inches or so from the ceiling. And that helped me go and string my little cloud type structure setup to create a sky. And that helps hide the top edges of the mirror. I'll show you some examples of how to hide mirror tops here. So here on the left is an umbilical between two structures. Beneath that, there's a mirror that goes directly underneath that whole building area. And so it reflects a couple freight cars that I have parked on a fake siding. It's actually not an operational siding, it's a fake siding. And then it also reflects several structures in the mirror that are in the foreground, and the large Savage Arm structure along with that sort of cream colored structure. And then clouds, as I mentioned, that effect goes and hides the top of that large mirror. There'd be no other real effective way of hiding that type of or size of mirror top without using some type of method that is realistic. And so I made the choice of doing clouds, and that really helps because the clouds actually just carry on through the mirror, so it looks kind of like a little storm brewing out into the distance. The other way I have a banner reflects the opposite side of the building. On another mirror, I have some clotheslines that are strung across at different intervals, and that also hides the top of a mirror that carries the street. And now we're going to go into what I mentioned earlier about paint. And paint can help hide mirrors' faults a great deal. As I mentioned earlier, you can paint the surface of the mirror or the backside of the reflected piece that's going into place. So this on the right-hand side is a giant sort of hill that I just blobbed onto the foreground scene. That was actually attached separately, and it sits in front of the mirror. And what I did was I painted sort of around the curve the same coloration, and I set it so that it was molded against a piece of flat glass. And so when I did the plaster work, it made a nice crisp edge, so it could be just placed directly against the mirror. And what I then did was I match painted the foreground that is actually visible, and then the stuff that actually touches the mirror the same color. And so that effectively hid the gap, so to speak. The other thing you know over here is I go and I have some brush, and it's basically lichen and some ground foam that hides the bottom edge of the mirror. The one thing that I wanted to avoid was having, this image of two pieces of lichen. So I went and I took some paint that was roughly the same color of the lichen and sprayed the bottom edge of that mirror with that color paint, and then placed the lichen in front of it. So the paint actually hides the image of the lichen, and it looks like it just blends in, that it's just this sort of little valley with a bunch of scrub growth through there. So that is another method that you can do to hide some of the reflective properties. Another thing that you can do is you can use clear or a light dusting of paint, and that will help, like if you have a river or something like that that wants to have either some spray or something coming off the top of it, that will produce that effect. Okay, some simple tricks. A good trick to use for reflective objects is to paint, like I said, the reflected side of the object. And this is where you want to have things look a little different than you want to actually blend it in to make like there's something carrying on through the mirror. You go and you use a different color than the side facing the observer. This is really effectively done with trees. So what I normally do is I paint half the tree a different shade of green, and then plant, especially if it's going to be planted close to a mirror. And I can also add different colors of texture that will also help hide the duplicate image, so to speak. And the reflected image makes it look really different, but it's still part of the forest. It's just a different looking tree. And this trick can be done with structures and vehicles. You have to make sure that there's kind of a sharp edge that's going to be dividing those two paint color schemes from view, because otherwise it would sort of give it away. So let's look at an example that I have here. And here I say there are two sides to a tree, and there really are. So on the left-hand picture, what I did was I just took a simple tree. I painted the actual tree, one half of it a different color. Then on the other half, I also added some ground foam. It does have the appearance of two trees. On the right-hand side, the same thing can be done with ground cover. You can actually, the same mirror, I didn't move the mirror or anything like that. It's the same sort of scene, but just adding, different colored ground foam or painting some of the ground foam on the reflected side allows for the difference. If you were to go and, obviously this is just, one tree, but if you were to do a forest like that, you'd see how quickly the mirror would actually disappear and you'd have an entire forest that you really couldn't tell what is the image and what is the true modeled forest. Now let's go into mirror symmetry. And I pulled up two sort of famous photos from John Allen because he really did a good job on these. Considering the time frame that he was working in, a knowledge of early on with model railroading, he was a true master with this technique. And so in the left-hand image of the burning building, you can see that he only modeled half of that building. What he did was, and like I mentioned earlier, is that you can go and you can use, kind of a gray, light gray or white spray paint. And so that's what he did, was sprayed some paint on that mirror so it looks like there's still some smoldering smoke coming from the middle of the structure. And that helped hide the ruse. He had, various things hiding the bottom edge of that mirror, like the tanks on the towards the extreme left, and then a structure on the extreme right. Then let's go and look at another one that he did. And what he did was use mirror symmetry. If you notice, towards the center right, there's a door there in that structure. Well, there's only half a door, half a car, and technically only half a building. And so the mirror cuts right across that. That sort of explains mirror symmetry, is that, what you go and you want reflected, that's what's going to be reflected in that mirror. Now, the problem with mirror symmetry is that if it's at an odd angle, it's going to reflect at an odd angle, or if it has lettering is going to be reversed, because technically it's a reverse image. And that's the key with mirror symmetry, is that you have to remember it's kind of a reverse image. So you have to correct for that and plan for that. Lettering, numbering, those kinds of things can give it away, so to speak. But if it's a structure or something, and you place it parallel, it'll work really well. And that one is pretty tough to see, that mirror, but it's a good size mirror. Planning, like with anything in a train layout, you should consider planning to be a big part of the process. There's lots of things to consider when adding a mirror. You have to look at it before you put a mirror in, a permanent mirror installation. So what I have is some small, they're like, about 4x5 or 1 foot by 1 foot square mirrors. I test things out as far as angles, positions, get those in when I can, and check to see if things are going to work. Big mirrors, they're a problem right from the get-go. The reason being is that you're working with a lot of surface area, and so that means that there's going to be a lot reflected back through that mirror. So you have to really plan for those. The key here is that you want to make a mirror that's going to add to the overall scene, and visitors, they really won't be able to know that there's a mirror there unless you point it out to them. One of the things is you really don't want it to detract or make the scene look unrealistic. Good one is, like if you have a structure and it has the reverse lettering in it, that just doesn't look right, and people will notice, oh, that's a mirror. The thing is that if there's any doubt, it's better to reevaluate the mirror replacement. If it just really doesn't work, just don't put it in. Go with something else. There's no harm in that. There may be a better location for a mirror on your layout. Here's a couple areas on my layout that are still in the plywood stage. They're going to have mirrors. I just haven't gotten to it yet. The one photo on the left, there's going to be sort of a squat mirror that is going to be done sort of a la John Allen with his yard, a small squat mirror that will enlarge the yard. The trick with mine is that I have one track that is a through track, so it's not going to be a very large mirror, but it will extend some of the tracks. And then the other thing that I'm going to do to hide it is there's going to be an overhead roadway. So that's one of the ruses that I explained earlier. I will be using that one, which should be effective because where that hole is back there, that's actually an access area. And so I want to keep that open, but there will be some fake building flats and such that will give the appearance of a town or city. And this is going to be one of my main cities, so there will be some fairly tall buildings, but not super tall to make it look like the mountains are a joke. So that's one area. The other area is in actually the opposite corner of the train room. This is kind of a nasty area because there's lots of track going through there, and there's lots of things that need to hide that track. And so I'm going to use a series of mirrors to try and expand. There's a boat canal or canalway for a shipping lane. So I'm going to try and expand that, and also try and have some of the structures appear larger than they actually are, or more extensive than they are. And I'm going to try and do some interior building mirrors. I'm going to have a couple structures that are going to be like giant, almost like airplane hangars that are going to have part of the structure open-ended. And so I'm thinking of putting a mirror just to make the structure appear larger in the interior than it actually is. So let's wrap this up. Parting thoughts: a mirror can be considered another tool in a modeler's toolbox, be a really effective way to create more space on a layout. Like with any tool, you have to be careful with its use. This clinic was just to go and touch on some of the issues with mirror use, and also how to add a new dimension to a scene where you can, punch holes in walls. You can make things look a lot larger than they actually are. You can have scenery be almost endless, yet there really isn't endless. It's just a reflected portion of the layout. But the one key point is planning, following some of the simple guides that I presented in this clinic. I didn't cover every aspect of mirror use. That we could go on all evening with that. I only touched on a few things, a few general things, but with those, it should set you on the right track, no pun intended, to place mirrors and put mirrors properly. Yeah, there are way more ways mirrors can be used in a model railroad, but I hope that you try and at least try to put a mirror on a layout, and you can even find new ways, because like I said, I didn't mention all the ways. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, David. That was a really informative clinic. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
Questions, comments, or discussion?
I was going to comment. I noticed that, for ambulances, like for a hospital, they always have the lettering backwards on them. So if you see it in your rearview mirror, it'll appear spelled forwards, ambulance. I just want to mention that.
Right. And one of the things that you can do is you can, like if you're reflecting a building and you want to have signage on the building sort of reflected in the mirror, you could reverse the lettering on the backside of a building, because it wouldn't be visible by the observer from the front of the layout.
Thank you. That's fascinating. Thank you.
Greg, right. Do you go to the glass shop? Do you mirror in the hardware store? Do you do anything special about the edges? How thick? Anything like that?
The large glass mirrors, I go to a glass shop. For small mirrors, you can use what are commonly referred to as crystal mirrors. You can get those at like Lowe's or Home Depot. The problem with those is you have to be careful with them, especially, when you start getting to larger surfaces. You want to have something that's really stable and really thick. If it's going to be just a small mirror that's going to reflect, maybe between a building or something like that, you can get away with, a crystal mirror, and, they're fairly inexpensive. The large mirrors that I had, those are both plate glass, 1/4 inch thick, heavy mirrors. I can really push on them to clean or whatever I need to do, and there's no give to them. That's something that you want to consider. The other thing is that you want to try using plate glass or some type of protective mirror in case there is some type of shatter or crack. It won't blow apart in a million pieces like a crystal mirror would.
Yeah, the last gentleman that mentioned that ambulance has a really good point. You can have a sign that's, say, a vertical sign, for example, that's hanging on a building, and it says painted one color and text that you can read from the viewer side. And on the back side, you can reverse the text on it. And an easy way to do that is to create what the text that you want to have readable in PowerPoint. You can grab that, do a snap of that area, and easily flip it around using PowerPoint, print that out and paste it on there. The other thing regarding mirrors is acrylic mirrors are really lightweight. They're really inexpensive. You have to use a special tool to cut them. I've used a 16th inch mirror. It's really flexible. It's too flexible, so it has to be mounted on a really flat surface. 1/8 inch mirrors work pretty good, and they're inexpensive. They're really lightweight, and they're really good for small sections. But like you point out, you get into those larger mirrors, you've got to use some really thick, safe glass on that. So anyway, just want to say I really enjoyed the presentation and picked up some pointers.
Thanks. The one key that you have to be aware of with acrylic is cleaning. You have to be very careful with cleaning because the surface can be easily scratched. Sort of like surface mount mirrors, the front surface mirrors. They are very difficult to keep clean, and they are very difficult to clean.
Yeah, and they definitely scratch. And some of the ones that I've had, I've seen a little mark on it. It's not like a deep scratch, but a little scuff mark, if you will. When I put it up there, I can't even detect that there's a scuff mark on it. On the first surface mirrors, the front surface mirrors, you can also get those in acrylics, and sometimes they're front surface on both sides, but those would be great. Like we're talking about interior buildings, those would be great for that. And of course, you'd have it interior. You wouldn't have a dust problem with that, hopefully. So
very good suggestions.
Yeah, great presentation, David.
Thank you.
Anybody else has any questions for David?
No one wants to ask how I got that 2x6 foot mirror up there.
Very carefully.
I did it by myself.
You could say at a zoo, you could put a framed mirror behind bars in a zoo to reflect the viewer. Put the viewer in the cage.
I thought maybe you got your wife to help you put them up.
One thing I can mention, if anybody wants like a copy of the PowerPoint, I can email it to them as a PDF.
Tell us what else you're doing for 4D.
I'm trying to go and get you to finish your CARS certificate so you can get your MMR.
Don't worry about it. I've been trying.
Did I successfully embarrass you?
I've been trying to get him to do it for 5 years. He hasn't done it yet.
That's the only way I can hang on to you guys as friends.
If they are interested in pursuing an MMR, to contact me. I'll be glad to answer any questions or give you any guidance in the process. I've been working on my train layout rather feverishly to get it ready for the National Narrow Gauge Convention coming up in the beginning of September. So that's another thing. If anyone's interested in attending that, go to their National Narrow Gauge website and sign up. You'll be able to see my layout in person because I'm going to be on the tour.